Megadeth announcing that this next album they will be putting out will be the last album they ever record, and this will be the last tour that they ever do. And Dave Mustaine has decided that he's going to call it a day after that. Folks, I cannot express to you in words how sad that makes me. Megadeth, for me, as a music fan, the music that Dave Mustaine created has a lot of meaning, not only to me personally, but Dave is an innovator in the heavy metal scene. He is one of the creators of thrash metal. Not only do many people credit him with that, but many of the thrash metal musicians out there who came up in the scene credit him with being one of the innovators and one of the creators of thrash metal music. And I got to be honest, folks, it does sadden me to see Dave call the day. I think Dave is an incredible songwriter. His music has definitely had a huge impact on me and on many of you. And regardless of whether you think Dave is an a-hole, like some of you out there have always said about him, or whether you like the guy, the bottom line is you cannot take credit away from him for how good of a songwriter he has been for over 40 years and how he has impacted the metal scene with his music. Before I get into his musical legacy, because obviously Dave was a big part of the early days of Metallica and a lot of the early music that they put out on the first couple of albums and even a little bit on Master of Puppets. And before I get into the accomplishments with Megadeth, let me give you my own personal story of how I ended up getting into Megadeth and the impact they have had on me. And I'm curious, folks, leave in the comments. I'm curious if you are a Megadeth fan or a fan of Dave Mustaine. By all means, I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. I'd love to hear what your favorite Megadeth album is, and I would love to hear how you ended up getting into them. So my story personally of getting into Megadeth starts in 1992. I was 15 years old. And folks, you got to remember, back then there was no social media. You had no streaming services. You had nothing like that. All you had to get into bands was word of mouth. And I had heard of Megadeth from a friend of mine telling me that Dave was part of one of the early lineups in Metallica and that he helped write a lot of the early music that Metallica had put out. So me, of course, at the time, I was just getting into heavy metal music at that time. But there are two bands that made me fall in love with this music and are two of the biggest reasons I do this show. Megadeth and Iron Maiden. Both of those bands, for me, really are what made me fall in love with this music and made me explore it even more than I had at the time. And obviously, 30 some years later, I'm doing this show, which I've done for 27 years. So as a 15-year-old with not a lot of money, I wanted to go out and find, some of these albums by Megadeth. So Countdown to Extinction at the time had come out. I found a used copy of it for $7 at a music store, and I found a brand new copy of Rust in Peace for it was like $8 or $9, something like that. So I bought both of those CDs. And Megadeth, for me, as far as a band is concerned and as far as the music is concerned, there's a lot of firsts for me as a heavy metal fan with Megadeth. Now, what do I mean by that? Megadeth was the first band that I ever went out and said, this is my favorite band. The first ever poster I had on my wall of any metal musician was a poster of Dave Mustaine. The first heavy metal t-shirt I ever bought was a Megadeth shirt. It was Symphony of Destruction. I remember because it said Symphony of Destruction on the back, And then, of course, it had Vic Rattlehead on the front. One of the first shows I ever went to was a Megadeth show. I believe Pantera opened up for them. I was really young when I went to this. The first ever album I ever went to a music store and pre-ordered was Euthanasia. And I remember that because it came with a special exclusive t-shirt. And if you pre-ordered it, you got, I think it was 3 floppy disks of a program I could install on my computer. They had like 30-second previews of a few of the songs. It was like the precursor to the enhanced CDs with the video. But I remember pre-ordering that album, and actually it came out on Halloween. That's actually when I picked up the pre-order for Euthanasia. But there were so many firsts for me as a heavy metal fan when it came to Megadeth. And they were actually the first band, too, that I actually went back and collected all of their albums, the entire discography. Now, granted, when Euthanasia had come out and Countdown to Extinction had come out, they didn't have a ton of records out like they do now. But I remember going out and getting So Far, So Good, So What. I remember going out and getting Peace Sells. And then I had to really look hard, but I found a CD copy of Killing Is My Business. So finding, they just had a lot of firsts for me as a heavy metal fan. And they are probably my favorite Big Four band. When you talk about the Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, and Metallica, Megadeth is probably my favorite of those group of bands. Anthrax probably would be second on that list, but Megadeth is definitely my favorite. Aside from maybe a couple albums like Risk and Super Collider, I, for the most part, have liked their albums. Even that MD45 project Dave Mustaine did, on the side back in the mid-90s, I was actually digging that. I know he has the other version where he re-recorded his vocals on there because he couldn't find Lee Ving's vocals, when he went to put that album out again or reissue it. But generally speaking, folks, Megadeth has had a huge impact on my life. The music has totally been a big part of my life for the last 30 plus years. And let's be honest, folks, the early stuff Dave Mustaine did with Metallica, songs like Jump in the Fire, for example, songs like Phantom Lord, a lot of the early Metallica songs, Ride the Lightning, songs that he co-wrote back in those old days, those had a big impact on me as well, because Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning were two of the very first, if not the first, heavy metal albums that I ever ended up getting. And that's what ended up getting me into this music. So very clearly, Dave Mustaine has had his impact on me, and he's had that same impact on thousands of other people. Somebody made a comment on the Facebook page when I posted about Megadeth. They said that Megadeth had a great album in 5 separate decades. I think he named Rust in Peace. I'd like to say he named Countdown to Extinction, obviously being in the 90s. He named System Has Failed. I think he named Dystopia. And then obviously The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead was an album he loved. I thought that was an interesting comment because this band has been around a long time. Now, folks, one of the things that for me is probably the most disappointing of Dave's career is the fact that so many journalists and so many people have constantly focused on his early years in Metallica. It's like if you go and watch an interview with Dave Mustaine, journalists keep bringing up the same 10 to 12 questions that we all know the answers to constantly. And they constantly want to focus on that short part of his career. And that's always disappointing because there's so much of his story that still, in my opinion, needs to be talked about more. And it's the story with Megadeth, the band itself, the music itself. There's so many records. There's so many great songs and albums Dave has done. It just always disappoints me when I see people just completely focusing on Metallica, because a lot of people are like, oh, Dave can't stop talking about Metallica. Well, a lot of people, a lot of these journalists keep asking him about it. And he's going to answer the question if you ask him. But I just think sometimes his career, the 40 plus years he's had Megadeth around, really just making incredible music, it gets overlooked by the short time he was in Metallica, because so many people just keep focusing on that. Now, as far as Dave's legacy is concerned, folks, again, I just talked about it. He had a big impact on Metallica in the early days and helped write a lot of the early music that really put them on the map. The man has carved out a 40-plus year career in Megadeth and has put out some of the most influential albums in the history of heavy metal music. Albums like Rust in Peace, Peace Sells But Who's Buying. And a lot of people love a lot of the later stuff. I mean, look, in the 90s, I got to be honest, even though they had some more radio-friendly stuff like On Cryptic Writings and albums like that. Now, folks, I don't like Risk, so don't ask. I'm not putting Risk in this category, but I thought Cryptic Writings was a good record. I thought Countdown to Extinction was great. Euthanasia I thought was a good album. The bottom line is this man has created a lot of great music. And not only that, but here's one thing Dave Mustaine has done throughout his career, and I said this about Ozzy. Dave Mustaine has always surrounded himself with world-class musicians. Look at all the guitar players he's had in the band. Every guy that he's had in this band has been a world-class musician. Like that lineup on Rust in Peace with Mustaine, Ellefson, Marty Friedman, Nick Menza. You know, that lineup, which pretty much went through most of the 90s, those guys were incredible musicians. And then when Dave came back with the band, with The System Has Failed, which I think is an incredible record. United Abominations, incredible album. You know, even going up to like albums like Dystopia, which I think is an incredibly well-written album. Or the early days, Gar Samuelson with his kind of more jazz-style drumming, playing. Chris Poland was an excellent guitar player. You know, he's had a multitude of phenomenal musicians. Even the current lineup, folks. Tammy Montessori is a phenomenal guitar player. He just has really, really great musicians that he has surrounded himself with. And you got to give him a lot of credit for finding the talent and bringing them into the band and keeping this band going. He built a brand for himself. Despite all of the hardships the guy endured. I mean, think about this for a minute. The guy gets sent home on a Greyhound bus by a band that basically became the biggest heavy metal band in the world, in Metallica. He bounces back, creates Megadeth. He has battle addiction, and he has won that battle. The man came back from an arm injury and I believe spent 17 months in rehab to hopefully play guitar again, which he did, and he came back with the System Has Failed album. And Megadeth, for the most part, maybe aside from one record, I think has been pretty consistently good since then. United Abominations is also an incredible record. It really, really is. But the bottom line is this. He has also persevered through a very tough music industry, playing a type of music that really isn't made for the mainstream, and he has influenced countless people. Now, I have interviewed Dave Mustaine on my radio, when this was a radio show, a few times. I have never had a bad experience with him. Dude was very nice, answered all of my questions, didn't get angry or hostile like some people, say, oh my God, he's such an a-hole when you interview him. I never had that experience. I met him twice when Megadeth came to Cleveland. The guy was extremely nice to me. So my whole experience with Megadeth has always been very, very good. And as a young kid, when you get to meet some of these guys, you meet guys that you would consider your heroes, for example, you always have that possibility of disappointment. But I was not disappointed anytime I have ever interacted with Dave. So that's how I look at it, folks. It's a sad day. I love Megadeth. I went out in my Firebird the other day and was driving through a bunch of country roads, and I brought all my old Megadeth CDs with me and listened to them. Spent about 5 hours in the car and listened to them while relaxing and driving the car. And all the memories that pop up with a lot of those early Megadeth albums. Just an incredible band. And folks, again, a lot of these legacy artists that have made a huge impact in creating this music, folks, this, again, I always say this, enjoy these people while they exist. Because eventually they are not going to be around playing music anymore. I'm looking forward to the next Megadeth album. I will probably go see them if I can, if they either come to Cleveland or come somewhere close to Cleveland. But regardless, folks, of whatever you may think about Dave Mustaine, whether you like the music he created or not, the bottom line is Dave was an innovator, and his music affected thousands of people in a very, very positive way. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.